This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Telly Edwards, and tonight's top stories. Public support swells for impeached South Korean President Yoon's party as questions around his possible arrest become entangled by the sudden resignation of his top security chief. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister wraps up his Malaysia visit, agreeing to strengthen defense and economic ties. His next stop, Indonesia, where leaders are expected to focus on defense equipment transfers. A deadly and devastating wildfire spreading in the Los Angeles area. The blazes have killed at least 10 people and have torched thousands of structures. And China vows accelerated fiscal support while hitting pause on government bond buys. Authorities searching for a remedy to an investor exodus that has savaged the markets. Also in East Asia tonight, a video sharing platform TikTok's set to make its final plea against a US ban at the Supreme Court. We analyze the stakes with an expert and our China correspondent. And the Chinese box office in a slump last year. Despite free movie tickets and government measures to woo moviegoers, can the industry reverse the slide? Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has completed the first leg of his two-nation tour in Southeast Asia. He met with Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim earlier this morning in Putrajaya, where both leaders pledged to strengthen defense and economic ties. CNA's Melissa Goh with this report.
Malaysia rolled out the red carpet for visiting Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Now, it's his first bilateral visit since he took office last October, and he chose Southeast Asia, a region which he viewed with utmost importance to Japan, he said, amid the uncertain global geopolitical landscape. Now, a brief four-eyed meeting was held between Prime Minister Anwar and Prime Minister Ishiba before a joint delegation meeting that was attended by Sarawak Premier Abang Johari Oping and National Oil and Gas Company CEO. Prime Minister Ishiba says the last time he was here in Malaysia was 34 years ago, adding that he's intrigued by the country's development, while Prime Minister Anwar thanked Japan for its contribution and support all these years, adding that there's tremendous opportunities for cooperation between both countries in the field of green investment and energy transition. At a news conference later, Prime Minister Anwar described the bilateral meeting as one of the most extensive he's had, from energy transition to carbon capture, utilization and storage to hydrogen production. Both countries pledged to deepen cooperation. Now, Malaysia wants Japan's help to transform East Malaysian state of Sarawak into a regional energy hub. Now, currently, Petronas supplies 16% of Japan's LNG needs by delivery of carbon-neutral liquefied natural gas to Shikoku Electric and Hiroshima Gas.
I also mentioned the formation of the ASEAN energy grid from Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and the initiative by Sarawak for energy undersea cable Sarawak to Peninsular Malaya and to Singapore. And this, of course, requires participation from Japan, other than the countries involved.
And Malaysia is the ASEAN chair this year, and Japan, Mr. Ishiba said, is prepared to help countries in Southeast Asia to meet their net zero target by 2030. And Malaysia also welcomes Japanese companies' participation in the mining and development of non-radioactive rare earth products. There are important components for electric vehicles and wind turbines. Now, while lending its support and expertise in flood prevention and disaster management, Mr. Ishiba also pledges Japan's support in helping Malaysia in furthering peace in South China Sea and the Middle East.
喫緊の課題といたしまして、東シナ海、南シナ海、中東、ミャンマー情勢等を取り上げてやり取りを行い、これらについても緊密に意思疎通をしていきたいということで一致を見たところであります。
Mr. Ishiba heads to Jakarta next to meet with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto. Melissa Goh, CNA Putrajaya.
Well, on that note, we turn now to CNA's Chatni Vatvani live in Jakarta. Chatni, Mr. Ishiba will arrive in Jakarta today. What can we expect on the agenda? That's right. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba scheduled to arrive in Jakarta this afternoon. Now, this is his first state visit since he was appointed as Japanese PM last October. And he will have a productive agenda here in Indonesia, where he is expected to meet with President Prabowo Subianto on Saturday at the Presidential Palace in Bogor, West Java. Now, before going to Bogor Palace, Prime Minister Ishiba is scheduled to lay a wreath at the Kalibata Heroes Cemetery here in Jakarta. After engaging in a one-on-one and bilateral meeting, PM Ishiba is also scheduled for a state lunch, reportedly to be attended by officials and businessmen from both countries. Chatni, so what sort of deals can we expect these two countries, to cooperate on? Well, we know that Malaysia and Indonesia are maritime regional powers located near important shipping lanes, which play a vital role in global security as well as the economy. Now, according to Japanese officials, PM Ishiba and President Prabowo are expected to agree on Saturday for Japan to provide high-speed patrol boats. Now, talks between the two leaders, who are both former defense ministers, are also expected to include military cooperation as well as arms transfers. Remember, earlier this week, Indonesia's defense minister hosted his Japanese counterpart as well for talks on the potential sharing of military technology. Now, before leaving Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Prime Minister Ishiba did tell reporters that he plans to take the time to discuss with the leaders of Malaysia and Indonesia about the future of the region's security issues and how realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific will contribute to the peace and security of the international community. Right, thanks very much for that report. CNA's Chatni Vatvani in Jakarta. Well, we are going for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, TikTok will appear in America's top court in a last-ditch bid to overturn a potential ban in the U.S. We dive into the long-running saga and what it means for U.S.-China relations. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight, right here on CNA. Support for South Korea's impeached President Yoon Song-yeol party is growing ahead of an anticipated second attempt to arrest him over his short-lived martial law declaration last month. Well, the presidential security chief resigned today as he warned against bloodshed if another arrest attempt is made. CNA's Lim Yun-suk has more from Seoul.
Supporters of impeached President Yoon Song-yeol and those calling for him to be punished have held rallies outside the presidential residence all week, braving sub-zero temperatures. Both sides have vowed to fight until the end, and this has raised concerns of a possible clash between them if the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials forced their way into the presidential residence to detain Mr. Yoon. Investigators have vowed to make this second attempt more forceful than their failed attempt on 3rd of January. Warning presidential guards that they can be arrested if they stand in the way again. President Yoon's lawyers have also voiced concerns amid some local reports that about 1,000 investigators could be mobilized for the arrest attempt.
현직 대통령을 지금 공수처와 경찰이 무슨 장갑차를 동원을 하겠다, 헬기를 동원하겠다. 이렇게 짧은 시간의 그 체포, 보여주기 체포를 위해서 이렇게 하는 것은 결코 정상적인 법 집행이라고 볼 수 없기 때문에 이러한 상황이 잘못되면 이것은 내전으로까지 갈 수 있다 하는 뜻입니다.
It's unclear how many guards are stationed at the presidential residence, but investigators earlier said it was unable to get past the security service in its first attempt because some 200 agents and soldiers blocked them by locking arms to form human barricades. The head of the Presidential Security Service, Park Jong-jun, told reporters before undergoing questioning by police for blocking investigators that the investigation should be done in a manner appropriate for the status of a sitting president.
저는 현직 대통령 신분에 걸맞는 수사 절차가 진행되어야 한다고 생각합니다. 현재와 같은 체포영장 집행 방식의 절차는 아니라고 생각합니다. 우리나라의 국격에 맞게 대통령에게 적정한 수사 절차가 진행되었으면 하는 바람입니다.
Mr. Yoon is believed to be holed up inside the presidential residence in the capital, Seoul. Meanwhile, approval ratings for him and his ruling People Power Party have rebounded. Latest figures show support for the ruling party at about 34%, up from 24% in the previous survey conducted 3 weeks ago, while those for the main opposition party have slid to about 36%, down 12 percentage points. 64% say they are in favor of impeaching President Yoon, while 32% oppose his impeachment. Some analysts say this could be partly because there are South Koreans who dislike Mr. Yoon, but also do not want the liberal leader of the Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, who had been indicted on several criminal charges, to be their next president. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
The U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear a bid today by TikTok and its China-based parent company ByteDance to block a law that's intended to force its sale or face a ban in America on national security grounds. The deadline, the 19th of January. And in the latest twist of events, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has indicated he wants to save the app. CNA's Olivia Seong with a recap of this long-standing saga.
January 19th, 2025, TikTok is set to be banned in the United States. But don't freak out.
Wait, what happened?
I'm sorry?
Like, why are you working here?
Oh, TikTok getting banned and everything.
Time is ticking for popular short video sharing app TikTok as a ban in the U.S. becomes more imminent than ever. Congress passed the measure and U.S. President Joe Biden signed the bill into law in April last year. The Justice Department saying that TikTok poses a national security threat because of its access to vast amounts of data, also alleging it has the ability to manipulate content that Americans view on the app. TikTok, which has more than 170 million users in the U.S., has denied the allegations and taken its fight to the courts. It argues that a ban is a violation of free speech protections under the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. Although last month the lower court rejected the arguments, and it's now appealing to the Supreme Court to block the sell or ban law.
We did go on TikTok, and we had a great response with billions of views, billions and billions of views. We got to keep this sucker around a little while,
But following his win at the U.S. elections, President-elect Donald Trump has called for the Supreme Court to pause implementation of the law, saying he should have time after taking office on January 20th to pursue a political resolution to the issue, an about-turn from his first term in office when he tried to ban the app and force its sale to an American buyer.
So how could things shake up from here? Well, to discuss this developing story, we are joined now by Senior Fellow for Chinese Security at the National Bureau of Asian Research, Roy Kampausen, who braved the rain to be here with us in the studio today, and of course, CNA's China correspondent, Olivia Seong. Welcome to you both. First, to you, Roy. Help us understand, does TikTok even have a case here in the first place under the First Amendment? Because it's been overturned by the lower court.
So the Supreme Court has asked both parties, the U.S. Department of Justice and TikTok, to present oral arguments later today, on this very question. They submitted their briefs 2 weeks or so ago. And the question is, are there First Amendment rights that are being somehow encroached upon? There's two parts of this. There's the part of the users, and then there's the part of the content creators. On the first point, the U.S. Circuit Court, which issued the first ruling, said First Amendment rights are not being encroached upon. It's purely about who controls the content and whether they're acting on behalf of a foreign adversary, in this case, the PRC. And so the Supreme Court will make a judgment on that question. The lower court actually said the content could remain the same if the company was divested. And so that's the interesting piece that the court will look at. The second is, for those who contribute to the app, the content creators, are their rights somehow being abrogated if the divestiture has to occur? That's a little more open-ended. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Roy, if I may press you there, if you had to make a call, how do you think the Supreme Court, given all that we know, could act?
As you know, I'm not a Supreme Court specialist. I think it would be a surprise if they overturn the circuit court. But I think it's important to note that they are giving to TikTok the opportunity to have their day in court. And so I think that's a positive development.
But the other development is that, President-elect Trump has called for a pause to this law that could lead to a potential ban. How much sway does Mr. Trump actually have in this matter?
He has no standing as president-elect to ask the Supreme Court to do this. There are two ways in which he might be involved, though. First, TikTok has already asked for a temporary emergency injunction. And it could well happen that after the court rules, even if they rule against TikTok, that they would allow for this temporary injunction, in which case it would then occur during President Trump's presidency. The second is that the law itself allows for a 90-day period for the president to actually allow for slow the implementation of law if there's judgment that the company is making good faith efforts to actually implement the law as it was written.
So, Ollie, I'm curious to know, you've been doing a lot of research on this, and how has TikTok reacted so far to the latest development?
One of the main things that TikTok has tried to do is to distance itself from any sort of links to the Chinese state or government. It emphasizes that its headquarters are in Singapore and Los Angeles. TikTok's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, likewise, has also been trying to do the same. We know that ByteDance also owns the Chinese version of TikTok, as some might like to call it, Douyin. And I have some images that I've pulled up here doing my very intense research, being on my phone. Comparisons between Douyin and TikTok are understandable. You just look at the logos. They are very similar. The apps have very similar interfaces as well. But TikTok has never been made available in mainland China. Douyin is only available in China. Now, content-wise, if we were to look at it as well, what you upload on one app doesn't appear on the other app. And then we're talking about other features that Douyin and TikTok are going into, particularly with e-commerce. And if we were to look at it, arguably, again, more successful in China. And there's this fun one. I'll tell you, I'm going to test your observation skills. If we were to look at this next image, do you notice anything different between these two pictures?
It's more than observation skills. You're testing in my eyesight, you mean? Well, on Douyin, your face looks brighter, I have to say. That's the immediate thing that I noticed.
Yeah, I noticed that it kind of helped me with my eye bags down there and some of my smile lines. But essentially, TikTok and Douyin, as the company has emphasized, are two very different apps. And ByteDance is saying that, it actually is owned by 60% of it is owned by global institutional investors. And with its Chinese founder, Zhang Yiming, owning a 20% stake. And they say that he is a private individual and not part of any state or government entity. And that's the argument that TikTok has been using with the U.S. courts. But Roy, to ask you again, President-elect Trump has called for a pause to this law, saying that he wants to pursue a political resolution. But doesn't that contradict the concerns that he has mentioned before about why there should be a ban based on national security grounds? Where would that leave that argument?
Right. There is a concern that this would introduce politics into national security in ways that put an American law passed by Congress and signed by an American president, making that subject to the whims and preferences of a president outside of his constitutional authorities. So that's a concern. I think it's important to question the First Amendment issue, though, is for American citizens and American entities. And so there's also this question of what privileges does TikTok have? Does TikTok USA have First Amendment rights that need to be defended if the individual users and the content creators are addressed? That I think is a question that we'll have to see how the court rules. But the court has already set aside the national security questions. It's simply about the First Amendment piece. The court is saying when the Congress wrote the law, they did so in accordance with the rights that they have under the U.S. Constitution. And so I don't think that they'll say much on that front.
And we're waiting for, this ruling. I'm curious to know, Olivia, what about the Chinese side, though? Based on the outcome, walk us through some of the possible scenarios and what could a potential ban actually mean for TikTok and obviously ByteDance multi-billion-dollar business?
Well, the big question is whether ByteDance will divest, right, of its business. But the indications, even though not answered directly, in 2023, we heard China's Commerce Ministry then outrightly say that it is firmly opposed to a forced sale of TikTok. And the ministries did say that the sale of TikTok is subject to Chinese laws because it involves technology export. And that referring to the algorithm that has made TikTok so successful, that algorithm that pushes you, what content you like and keeps you scrolling and scrolling. And what all this means also is that ByteDance may not be able to make a decision on its own, even if it wanted to sell. And China analysts, Roy, correct me if I'm wrong, do you agree that China would likely block the sale of this, and that would have greater repercussions for China-US ties and could escalate tensions? So analysts say, blocking the sale, though, perhaps could be something China could do. It could give China the upper hand when it comes to dealing with the US, perhaps giving it a chance to critique the US. We know the Chinese Foreign Ministry has previously said that in this move, it called it Shear's robber's logic and calling it an abuse of national security. Of course, this would be at the expense of ByteDance's business, a multi-billion-dollar business. But, most of ByteDance's revenue actually comes from its Chinese app, Douyin. So, Roy, what is your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. The intervention of the PRC government does complicate the question about foreign control, right? Their intervention suggests they have an interest, and that then sort of underscores the question about does the PRC have an inappropriate amount of control on the question. That's just another dimension, as you say, of how it might play out.
But does this open the floodgates for other Chinese companies? If the U.S. is concerned about national security with TikTok, there are other companies, apps that are operating in the U.S. We have seen, CATL, Tencent being added to a list of firms allegedly helping the Chinese military. We've also seen a proposed crackdown on Chinese vehicles on American roads. And one might argue that, this is just the beginning. What is your take?
Well, I think you're right that there is a broader concern with Chinese technology in the U.S. It's important to note, though, the law is only about TikTok. And the entry of Tencent and CATL on the DOD list is really a separate process. It doesn't bring automatic sanctions. It's really a reputational hit on those companies for the analytical judgment that the U.S. DOD makes that they support the Chinese military. So is it the start of will the floodgates be opened, or are they already open to a certain extent? I think probably so, but other companies won't face the same things that TikTok have faced unless there's specific legislation written about them.
And Roy, just before we let you go, a very quick question here. I mean, you said that obviously Trump can't do anything now because he's president-elect. But when he comes into office, is there a possibility that, Trump could so-called save TikTok if he wants to?
Well, he doesn't have any privileges to set aside American law. The only ways he can be involved are if either of those two conditions that I laid out actually apply. There's a temporary emergency injunction, and there's a period of time then in which his administration could be involved, but that's only a delay of the divestiture date. The other is a longer period of time in which he's given discretion in the event that it takes the company longer to actually accomplish the divestiture. So it's concerning that a president thinks he might have the latitude to undo law that is on the books.
All right. I know you've got a dinner appointment, Roy. I'm going to leave you to that. But thank you so very much for your time on thoughts on this, as well as
Thank you.
Olivia Seong. Right. On that note, we are going to go for a short break now. But coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China's sluggish economy is showing up in its empty cinemas. Can the industry turn things around? We talk to another expert and our correspondent. reporting East Asia tonight. Public support swells for impeached South Korean President Yoon Song-yeol's party as questions around his possible arrest becomes entangled by the sudden resignation of his top security chief. The Japanese Prime Minister wraps up his Malaysia visit, agreeing to strengthen defense and economic ties. His next stop, Indonesia, where leaders are expected to focus on defense equipment transfers. And China vows accelerated fiscal support while hitting pause on buying government bonds. Authorities searching for a remedy to an investor exodus that has savaged the markets. Several new movies are set to hit theaters in China during the upcoming Spring Festival, as the film industry hopes for a box office revival after last year's slump. Well, according to the China Film Administration, revenue fell by almost a quarter, deepening its post-pandemic downturn, while it grossed about $5.8 billion, down from the $7.5 billion in 2023. And for more, we are joined now by Yin Wen-yen, Assistant Professor, Seoul Business School, Assist University, and CNA's Lauren Ong in Beijing. Well, welcome to East Asia tonight. So, Lauren, let's just start with you first. Tell us a little bit more about these numbers.
Well, I'll tell you, to put things into perspective, you really have to look at the box office figures over the past 6 years. In 2024, at about 42.5 billion yuan, that's about $5.8 billion for the 2024's box office sale. And it's disappointing because it kind of shows that the post-pandemic recovery that the film industry has been hoping for isn't really lifting off. Now you need to look at 2019 numbers. You see that it hit almost $9 billion, and that's a record high. But this upward momentum was sort of disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and you see the 2020 to 2022 numbers underperforming. But interestingly, the film industry was actually banking on a post-pandemic boom. You see multiple theaters increasing the number of screens they have, upgrading their technology and projectors. So 2 years on, you see that this post-pandemic boom hasn't really materialized, and you can see why there's disappointment from that. Well, from 2023, there's some glimmer of optimism as we see the box office sales go up to about $7.5 billion. But this is mostly because of the backlog of films from the pandemic and the first time that people can go to the theaters in a long time. So it kind of contributed to the uptick. So in 2025, what's it like in the movies in China? Well, I went to the movies over the weekend. Let's have a listen.
It's a Saturday night at the heart of Beijing's central business district. In one corner is a well-known cinema chain known for hosting movie premieres and familiar to large crowds. According to ticketing apps, the movie Octopus with Broken Arms ranks among the top in the box office chart. It is a locally produced thriller that was released in late December. But even then, the number of empty seats tells a different story. A worrying trend that is observed across other films on offer.
Now, I've been monitoring this Chinese ticketing app called Damai, checking seating availability in various cinemas in Beijing. And more often than not, whether it's a Friday night or the weekend, it seems that less than 50% of the seats are filled.
Throughout 2024, about 1.01 billion went to the movies, down from almost 1.3 billion a year earlier. This falls short of industry insiders' hopes for a sustained recovery following improvements seen in 2023. It was the fourth highest box office in history, following a record number of films released from the pandemic backlog.
一年可能2-3次这样。
不经常。
为什么呢？
没钱，也不太喜欢看吧。一个人看没有意思，也没有时间去看。
没有时间看。
没有时间。没有在影院看是吗？
就过年的时候会看，2-3次吧，就是年前年后的。
Film industry leaders from across China called for more reform last week, encouraging more movies that resonate with audiences and to tap the international market. All this comes as China continues to face a weak domestic consumption that has sunk to record lows. Accounting for more than half of China's GDP, it's one of the biggest drags in China's economy.
Well, the 2024 box office numbers sort of wraps up incentives you've seen across the country, including free movie tickets, as well as festivals to promote films and the supply of films, distribution of films. But last August, you also saw that promoting films was actually part of broader plans laid out by the State Council, China's highest administrative governing body, to boost domestic consumption in general. And in March, you see that film regulators have actually committed to being more open when it comes to film imports. And even during the Olympics, you see movie theaters screening the Olympics to try to increase footfall. So, Professor, a question to you. Despite all these measures throughout the year, why do you think there's still a slump in the box office sales?
Thank you for having me. Despite the government's measures to boost domestic consumption, however, these measures are not enough. As shown in the show, actually, these measures, because I'm primarily focusing on the consumption side, but actually we need to also address some other more fundamental factors, such as supply and competition related factors. So regarding the supply side, actually, Chinese filmmakers are not competitive enough to satisfy the evolving consumer taste. Consumers actually are not just satisfied with the star-driven films, but they are looking for better quality contents. And from the competition side, actually, the platforms actually can provide more convenient and also affordable contents. And these contents actually are particularly appealing to the consumers, particularly during the difficult economic times. So, and such kind of change and shift in consumer behavior has further negatively affect the cinema attendance. So I would emphasize one is supply and the other is competition. The alternative channels of content consumption have negatively affect such kind of result.
So, Lauren, we heard there from Professor Yin that those government measures aren't quite enough. Consumer tastes are evolving. So then what exactly is the industry doing to boost sales?
Well, domestic films in particular have been largely poorly received by the local audience. And like what Professor Yin said just now, many of these reasons point to the content. Even the movie I went to, The Octopus with Broken Arms, the cast and crew admitted during interviews that this was a criticism that they were aware of, and instead they chose to sort of focus on improving the storyline to make it more unpredictable. And these sentiments, you've seen them online, you've seen them on even Chinese local state media. And according to an editorial on China Daily, it says that audiences are actually tired of movies having similar themes. And it attributes this to the lack of creativity, mostly conjured by excessive caution that these films might get them into trouble, and as a result, excessive, what it calls unnecessary intervention by the local governments because of that. So what does it take for patrons to actually go to the movies? Well, I spoke to some of them. Let's have a listen.
主要还是看片儿是什么样子的吧，上映的是什么样子的，会比较挑一些。没什么兴趣，而且有些喜欢的根本引进不进来。就像以前我看一些像《寄生虫》这种电影，它是引进不过来的。
今天真的，除非是有一部电影就是看的人比较多，然后就是票房比较高的，我才会去看。
Also help us understand this, Professor. Do you think it's also got to do with regulations? I mean, are they getting stricter?
Yes. In order to address this question, I would like to look back at the historical evolution of Chinese industry development. In more recent years, it seems like Chinese government regulations have been stricter in this industry. However, if we look back to the early 1990s, when the film industry was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Chinese government actually, in order to save this kind of industry and liberalize the industry by allowing the 10 most globally very successful blockbusters. And that actually has really contributed to the revival of the industry. So I think when the industry slowdown continues and the government could be very responsive to this kind of situation instead of restricting the regulation even further, I would say that there could be loosening of the regulation in order to encourage the industry development.
Well, Professor, thank you. Actually, adding to your point, we actually see that some of these re-releases are seeing netizens are complaining about deleted scenes and changes to storylines. So, but I do want to ask, like, how marketable do you think China films are overseas? And is it going to be a viable way to boost revenue, given that it hasn't seen much success domestically?
Yes, great question again. In order to address this question, I would also first draw on some successful experiences of Hollywood films and also recently emerging Korean wave. So in order to achieve global success, we need to actually maximize the global appeal of content and features, as seen, we can see from the Korean wave and also Hollywood filmmakers. They are not maximizing the national identity, but global appeal, actually. But back to Chinese films, actually, we can see that Chinese government try to maximize the Chinese elements, but this kind of strategy may not be very attractive for the global audience. So far, Chinese films are not so attractive in the global market, although Chinese government has been doing a lot of efforts and to increase the portion of the export of domestic films in the overseas market. But I think this in order to increase increase the global appeal of Chinese films, not just Chinese government but also Chinese filmmakers may need to change their approach and strategy and when developing their films.
Right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this conversation, but thank you both for your insights. Yin Wen-Yen, Assistant Professor, Seoul Business School, Assist University, and of course CNA's Lauren Ong in Beijing. We're going to go for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, the world's top chip manufacturer, Taiwan's TSMC, outperforms market expectations, leveraging consistent strength in global AI demand. Plus, a new player emerges in the long-running takeover saga of Japan's 7&i Holdings. All the details up next. Deadly and destructive wildfires are spreading in the Los Angeles area. At least 10 people have been killed, and officials warn that the death toll could rise further. And you're looking at live pictures of Los Angeles, the city skyline shrouded in haze. The fires, 5 of them, are burning into a third night. An estimated 10,000 structures destroyed, including the homes of Hollywood celebrities Anthony Hopkins, Billy Crystal, and Paris Hilton. Fierce desert winds that have been fanning the flames dropped on Thursday. But officials say that the winds are back up again overnight, and red flag conditions are expected until Friday afternoon local time. Now, these are the worst fires in Los Angeles history. Satellite imagery shows houses in this area before the fire erupted, and after the flames, total destruction. President Biden says that the government will cover the cost of fire response for 6 months and help victims get back on their feet.
To the families who have been impacted by this disaster, you're living through a nightmare, I know. And I promise you, we're going to help you get through this and eventually recover and rebuild.
For more coverage on wildfires in California, do head over to our website, cna.asia. Well, time now for some business updates with Roland Lim. And Roland, TSMC delivering another stellar report card?
That's right. The boom in AI chips, as well as massive investments by Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, boosting its bottom line. Now, TSMC has been riding the AI boom to an impressive set of fourth quarter earnings that easily beat market expectations. The chipmaker says its December revenue came in at $8.4 billion. That's a jump of around 58% compared to the previous year. For the full year, TSMC posted revenues of nearly $90 billion, and that's a 34% rise from a year ago, when the chipmaker logged its first annual decline due to a global economic slowdown. The results exceeded its estimates in October for full-year revenue to increase by nearly 30%. The latest data also reinforcing investor hopes that the frenzied pace of AI hardware spending will extend into 2025 from the likes of Microsoft and Amazon. Now, TSMC lists some global giants among its customers, such as Apple and Nvidia. The company has been at the forefront of the march towards AI, which helped it weather the decline in chips used in consumer electronics like tablets. TSMC's market value nearly doubled in 2024, and it now trades in the US at a valuation close to $1.1 trillion. Its Taipei-listed stock leapt more than 88% last year, compared with a 28.5% gain for the broader market. In a new development in the ongoing Seven & I buyout saga, a leading U.S. investment firm is reported considering a substantial stake in Seven & I's founding Ito family's bid to take it private. Now, Bloomberg says U.S. private equity giant Apollo Global Management is mulling a commitment of as much as $9.5 billion for an equity stake in the plan. The proposed plan includes the Ito family contributing more than $3 billion in equity. Itochu Corp, that's a key player in Japan's retail market, would invest more than $6 billion, while Apollo's $9.5 billion would come in the form of preferred shares. Equity stakes in the deal would be around $25 billion in total, with additional financing provided by major Japanese banks. The valuation of the buyout was originally planned at nearly $57 billion. It was reportedly lowered due to Seven & I's lower market value and weaker earnings. Despite this, the deal remains significant, with details still under negotiation. An Apollo representative declined to comment on the talks. If completed, the buyout would rank among the largest on record. Shares of Seven & I surged as much as 7.4% following the report, signaling strong investor interest in the potential deal. The stock pared off some of those gains to close nearly 5% up. A Hong Kong court has ordered the liquidation of a key offshore unit of China Evergrande Group. Now, this marks the latest legal win for liquidators seeking to access the defaulted builder's key assets. Now, the unit, CEG Holdings BVI, owns nearly half of Evergrande Property Services Group. That's a property management arm valued at around $945 million. It was a crucial part of failed restructuring talks with creditors. Now, since Evergrande's 2021 default, liquidators have been navigating complex legal hurdles to recover funds. Their efforts include targeting offshore assets and pursuing $6 billion in disputed payments to individuals. The ruling comes as China's property sector remains sluggish, with developers still grappling with weak sales and mounting debt. China's central bank has temporarily halted buying of government bonds in its latest attempt to defend its currency and growing bets of weak economic growth. People's Bank of China says the suspension of its sovereign debt purchases was mainly due to short supply. China's benchmark bond yields have slumped to an all-time low. Investors are increasingly snapping up bonds as a safe haven as a prolonged property crisis and weak consumption continues. Analysts say the suspension reflects Beijing's discomfort with plummeting government bond yields and increasing renminbi depreciation. The PBOC overhauled its policy last year and added government bond trading as a tool to manage liquidity in the economy. Chinese government bond yields rose across the curve following the statement, with 5-year rates climbing 8 basis points earlier and the 10-year rate hitting 1.67%. They have since pared some of those gains. Hong Kong and Chinese stocks ended the week in the red, pushing a closely watched benchmark towards a bear market. The MSCI China Index dropped by as much as 1.1%. Now, Chinese stocks have started 2025 on a weak note as investors brace for higher tariffs that may prolong the country's economic slowdown. A quick look at the currencies now. Onshore renminbi currently trading at 7332 to the dollar, and offshore is at 7351 to the dollar.
Right, and here to explain more about bond yields and why it moves the value of the local currency, Roland is now in the hot seat. You haven't been here for a while, seated right next to me. So tell us in a nutshell, why are Chinese government bonds so important?
Well, they're not just important, they're also very popular. I mean, not just Chinese government bonds, but any government bonds for that matter, because government bonds are backed by the issuing government and they are relatively risk-free. So in times of a downturn or when things go bad, like say war, investors tend to be more risk-averse, so they take money from their equities portfolio, put it into bonds. At the same time, when interest rates go up, that's when bondholders will then sell the bonds and then go and put that money into a bank deposit because they get better returns there, and vice versa. So what's happened in China is that interest rates are low now because China has a moderately loose monetary policy, and economic activities are not generating the returns that investors want. And because everyone is now buying bonds, there's more demand than supply. So that's what's happened, short supply. That was the official reason given by the PBOC. And as you can see from China's 10-year government bond yield, I don't know if we can call that up now, that's a benchmark for economic growth and inflation. That has fallen off a cliff. It's now hovering around 1.6% level. Another reason why bond yields are so low is because the economy is awash with liquidity. So we have high household savings in China. We also have low demand for loans at banks. So those monies are actually making their way to the bond market. So another reason why bond yields are so low. So analysts at this point in time are actually warning that 10-year Treasury yields could fall by another 0.2 percentage points to as low as 1.4% by the end of this year.
Okay, so Roland, investors buy more bonds because they're bearish on the economy. So essentially, what does that say about the Chinese economy?
Well, it certainly highlights the challenges faced by Chinese policymakers because there's a tough balancing act going on. They've got to, one, navigate or stimulate the economy on a growth trajectory. They've got to stabilize the currency. And they also got to manage liquidity in the system. So far, the slew of stimulus measures that China has announced late last year, well, that really hasn't impacted the economy as much. Although we did get a boost in the stock market because after the stimulus measures were announced, there was a 15% jump in share prices across the board in 2024 in China. But back to the currency front. Now, since the start of December, the Chinese currency has fallen 1.3% against the dollar. It is now at a 16-month low. And many economists predict that the currency will actually hover around 750 to the dollar by the end of this year. And that will be a 20-year low. Reason for that is that many are speculating because of Trump coming into office in the US, there's going to be more tariffs, and that's going to hit hard on Chinese exports as well. So what the central bank did was, on Thursday, I should say, was instead of weakening the currency, it actually stepped up to shore up the currency. The central bank is going to be selling some 60 billion renminbi of short-term 6-month bills in Hong Kong, middle of this month. And that's about $8 billion worth. And it's going to be the biggest amount in Hong Kong since 2018, according to Bloomberg. Why are they selling bonds in Hong Kong? Well, it's one way of actually shoring up the currency other than interest rate action. Usually you would have raising interest rates to do that. But what they're doing now is that these bonds will actually soak up excess capacity or cash in the system. And then that will also raise demand for the currency and also tighten the supply offshore. So some of the reasons why it's hard for the policymakers to actually balance this tightrope, so to speak. So it's a balancing act. And the bond yields that we're seeing today, reflection of that.
Well, thanks so very much for sharing with us your insights and those numbers. Roland Lim there from our business desk. Okay, on that note, it's time to wrap up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.